Hello and welcome to Beyond the Mekong, a podcast broadcast by The Diplomat. And with me today is Phil Robinson from Human Rights Watch, who has been in the job for more than 14 years. Phil, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are human rights shaping up in Southeast Asia? I know it's a pretty obvious kind of a question, but we've seen a rough ride over the last couple of years, probably over the last 5-10 years. Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar. What's your prognosis?
It's been a continued downward slide. Quite clearly in the Mekong, if you look at Myanmar, it's in the middle of a brutal civil war where we've got crimes against humanity being committed every day. We're in the third year of that conflict. Cambodia, the democratic opposition has been effectively wiped out since the banning of the Cambodia National Rescue Party in November 2017 and then the subsequent bogus elections in 2018. Vietnam is a complete and total disaster. There's going to be a story coming out about Vietnam's hostile intentions towards the international community. So at the same time that people are talking about doing trade deals and working with the Vietnamese government views the international community as a danger, as something that is trying to subvert the Vietnamese Communist Party and their continued control of the Vietnamese people. And that kind of paranoid outlook, that there's a color revolution trying to topple, whether it be the government in Vietnam, the government in Laos, the government in Cambodia, is something that is being, I think, perpetuated by China looking at the hostility of the West, mm-hmm. and then extrapolating that and working with various different client states, including those, the hostile intentions of the human rights lobby, the international development agenda, participation, civil and political rights. All these things are being sort of construed as being something that will subvert autocratic single-party power.
Is it too much to expect these countries to measure up to Western standards on human rights? I mean, it's not like they ever have.
Well, they've all signed the various different conventions and treaties. They basically said that they want to do this. It's not like someone is necessarily twisting the arm of these governments. I mean, look at Cambodia. Mm-hmm. It's ratified every major international human rights treaty that exists.
Right.
It just has no intention of implementing any of them. Even countries like Thailand, where there is a democracy, but we just came through a period of almost a 10-year military dictatorship.
Right.
So there's a high degree of hypocrisy by these governments. And that on one hand, they say that they want to play by the international rules, but then when push comes to shove, they say, well, we don't want that one. We don't want this one. We don't want to have accountability for instance, enforced disappearances, right, or issues related to freedom of expression on the internet.
Are these governments increasingly working together behind the scenes in terms of ensuring their own agenda? We've had activists who have crossed borders go missing. We've had activists within their own borders, like Sombath Somporn, who I mentioned earlier, go missing. And it's quite worrying in the sense that it's a breach of every international obligation that they have signed up to under the United Nations for a start.
Yeah. Well, it's quite clear that there is an accelerated level of cooperation between various different Mekong states, mm-hmm. and what is increasingly being termed as transnational repression. This is pursuing people across borders, pursuing those activists. We're going to be bringing out a very comprehensive report probably in April about what the previous Thai government of General Prayut and General Prawit were doing with the Cambodians, with the Vietnamese, with the Lao, with the Burmese and others, and with China. And what we have found is that more and more governments are willing to pursue their activists overseas, engage in surveillance, engage in abductions. We've had people, for instance, in Thailand who've gone missing, like Pot Sayabong, a trade union leader, yep, from Laos. We had a guy named Kai Vang Duong, who is a political dissident from Vietnam, who past April was kidnapped in Pathum Thani and dragged away by a Vietnamese snatch squad.
This is what I wanted to ask you, is how does it logistically work on the ground? I mean, are they sending over their own squads? Are they in cahoots with the local constabulary? Are the governments aware that this is going on, or are they just quietly turning a blind eye?
There is a level of collaboration and cooperation between various different governments. We were referring to this as a swap mart. I want that guy. I want to get this person back. What do I need to do in order to persuade you? Let me to do that. There's supposedly an agreement that if you're going to come into our territory, you have to inform us. You have to work with us.
Right.
And we've seen that. We've seen, for instance, we had the case of a political activist named Paul Nimon from Cambodia,
right,
who had fled to Thailand, who was a political refugee, had UNHCR refugee status. He was picked up at the Big C by a Thai police squad, was interrogated, was driven around, then was handed over to a car of Cambodian officials who were in Thailand, who then drove him to the border, took him across the border, and took him down into Phnom Penh the next day so that he could recant his support for the opposition and say that he was joining the Cambodian People's Party.
And then there were the arrests made before Hun Manet's visit earlier February.
Well, this is a case where the Cambodian embassy and the Cambodian government is informing the Thais, and they're saying these guys are a bunch of troublemakers. They might protest, or they might, they'll make something up about it. And Thailand is more than happy to go after them.
Does the United Nations and third countries, do they have to do more in terms of? They're supposed to have in many of the cases. They sanction United Nations refugees, which should afford them protection. If they can't enforce that protection, then what good are they?
Well, this is a critical failing, for instance, of the various different governments. For instance, Thailand is not being held accountable to protect refugees. Thai immigration law, because Thailand hasn't ratified the Refugee Convention, states very clearly that these people are illegal migrants. They've crossed the border illegally, and they're subject to arrest and deportation. Now, in the case of these 6 people who were arrested before Hun Manet turned up earlier in February, all of these people had UNHCR registration. They were considered to be persons concerned by UNHCR. So as soon as they were picked up, it fell to us and others in civil society to start ringing the alarm bell. First of all, working with the UN and saying, these people in fact do need protection. And the UNHCR will swing into action and basically talk with the Thai government, talk with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, talk with others saying, you can't send these people back. But then we also have to get other embassies involved from governments in Europe and North America. They need to step up and tell the Thais, don't send these people back. And it's through that concerted advocacy that we're able to finally get an agreement that, okay, these people are refugees, these people need to be protected, they won't be sent back. But it's all on us to basically run around. Somebody in Cambodia sets this in motion by claiming, okay, this person's going to set up a protest. It's the easiest thing in the world for Thailand to swoop these people up. And frankly, they don't care. Those people now, that were arrested are all still in the immigration detention. And we're expecting eventually that they will be allowed to resettle to some third country, again, probably in Europe or North America, and they will be out of the picture. And for the Cambodian government and for the Thai government, that works just fine.
Right. Do you ever get tired of it?
I can't get tired of it because, people's lives are on the line. We don't step up, and we don't make the phone call, we don't send those emails or, communicate with these policymakers, these diplomats, these UN officials, then we'll lose somebody.
I think what I'm driving at is that over the last 20 years, 25 years, Human Rights Watch has become a benchmark in terms of calling governments out and stepping up in terms of the protection of those who need it, which will lead me to another point in Australia shortly. It's just did you envisage that the situation would be like this, say, 14 years ago when you first started with Human Rights Watch?
Well, I would say that we expected that there would have been a lot more progress on human rights and democracy going forward.
Which I think was a kind of, that feel-good kind of energy that was coming out initially at the end of the Cold War, and then there were enormous demonstrations, pro-democracy rallies, mid-2010s, but that was actually, I think, a good thing. People were expressing themselves, people were out on the streets, and then all of that got clobbered.
Yeah, so we look
across the region.
We look, for instance, in Thailand. Quite clearly, there was a very good constitution in 1997. There was a reform movement that had really sort of built up momentum. You had Thaksin Shinawatra elected as prime minister. He started undoing some of those reforms, which was unfortunate. But the reality was that we had expected that military coups were a thing of the past.
Right.
The previous military coup had been in 1991, and after the Black May 1992 democracy protest, we figured that that was that. That everybody said there can't be any more coups. And what we saw was another coup in 2006, 2007, and then the instability, and finally the coup in 2014, which really set back Thailand a very huge way in terms of democracy and human rights. You shift to Cambodia. I mean, Cambodia in 2013, there was a pretty free and fair election. It was pretty wide open. And,
yes, it was.
And certainly the 2022 commune elections were pretty wide open.
That scared them.
And it scared the ruling party, and the ruling party decided they were going to shut things down. Excuse me, not the 2022 commune election. I meant the 2017 commune election.
Well, let's just clarify this. So the 2017 commune elections were quite free and fair. 2018, the opposition Cambodian National Rescue Party had been
wiped out.
Wiped out, indeed. And the ruling Cambodian People's Party had won every seat in parliament.
Well, it's interesting. 2017, you had the commune elections in Cambodia, where Hun Sen decided that they were going to run on their economic record. That he thought that they brought development. This is all these things that had worked out.
Yep.
And that they weren't going to use the kind of repression and violence that the Cambodian People's Party had used in other previous elections. It didn't work out for them. People realized that there was a possibility to send a message. A lot of people unhappy about corruption. A lot of people unhappy about loss of land and other natural resources. And so there was a very, very strong vote against the Cambodian People's Party, although it was 44% went to the Cambodian National Rescue Party, but it was enough to scare the ruling party to believe that if they didn't wipe out the opposition, that they were going to lose. And this zero-sum mentality of politics in Southeast Asia.
I think it is zero-sum. I think that's quite apt. And then it basically happened again with the commune elections in 2022. The Candlelight Party, which was a reincarnation of the Cambodian National Rescue Party, they were allowed to contest. They got about 25% of the overall vote, which is not a threat to the ruling party, but that was enough. And then they find themselves disqualified from the national elections because they didn't have the original paperwork when the party was set up, which is
ridiculous.
Yeah.
What we're understanding, and we're going to be bringing something out, we've done some research in this most recent Senate election that's happened this past Sunday, on the 25th of February, is that, in fact, there was a concerted effort by government officials and Cambodian People's Party representatives to intimidate the Cambodian Candlelight Party representatives, the councillors who were supposed to vote for the senators. And they were either being offered bribes. They were also being told that they should think about the safety of their families if they decided to vote for the opposition rather than stay away from the vote for the Cambodian People's Party. They were being told that if, in fact, they did buck the Candlelight Party's direction and voted for the CPP, that they could not be removed from their position because the Minister of Interior wouldn't allow it. Some of them were being offered $3,000, $5,000, mobile phones, motorcycles, you name it. There was a concerted campaign by the Cambodian People's Party to try to steer Candlelight Party councillors who obviously would have voted for the Candlelight Party if they had not had this kind of pressure to either stay away or to vote. And what we saw was that 25% of the Candlelight Party councillors voted for the CPP.
Right.
So, obviously the campaign was effective. You had three Candlelight Party senators, and you've got 55 CPP senators.
They have their way. More than once, I've had people who have said to me that you might have a politician, an opposition politician, who's sitting down quietly having a cup of tea when he's approached by a CPP aficionado, and he might just sit down gently and say to him, we're okay with you. You have friends. Are you okay with them?
Yeah.
Will they be okay?
Right.
And then they just walk off. It's this sort of subtle, hardly subtle.
Right.
They're in your face.
Well, I mean, one of the things that people are also being told, these Candlelight Party councillors at the commune level were being told very clearly by the government that, hey, 2027, the Candlelight Party is not going to be allowed to contest for the commune elections.
Right.
So, now is the time to get off the train. Now is the time to switch over. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family.
We'll find you a job.
Yeah. Well, that's it. And this is what happened. I mean, look at the size of the Cambodian government. I mean, they've got 11 deputy prime ministers. They've got a cabinet of I don't know how many dozen.
Sure. Hun Manet.
I mean, it's a buffet.
Absolutely.
It's a government buffet.
Hun Mani, Hun Sen Chug's son, Hun Manet's youngest brother, has just been named the 11th Deputy Prime Minister to top everything off.
So it's a family affair. But what we're seeing is a failure of good governance across the board. Mm-hmm. So in places like Laos, people are very angry about corruption and land seizures. But they know if they stick their head up, it'll be knocked off.
Tallest nail gets knocked hardest.
Yes. Vietnam, what we're seeing is they've completely wiped out independent civil society. They're going after the NGOs. They're going after not just the environmentalists who are, of course, talking about issues related to global climate change and coal and things like that, but they're also going after the LGBT NGOs. They're going after the rural development NGOs. Anything that is outside the control of the Vietnamese Communist Party is suspect, is a potential area for what they call peaceful evolution. And they see peaceful evolution as being U.S. and the Europeans using money and influence to overturn the Vietnamese Communist Party's rule through sort of a united front structure. I mean, the Vietnamese Communist Party looks at what they did to other people in the past, and they say, okay, they're going to do the same to us.
Yep.
But they're saying, okay, we need to engage with the international community. We need to do business with them. But the takeaway is that they are going to infuse all aspects of civil society, of various different organizations, of the legislatures, of line ministries with Ministry of Public Security officials in order to prevent this so-called peaceful evolution. Right. And this is the mentality. It is in talking to diplomats who have had a lot of experience, for instance, working in China. They're like, this is China light. This is what Xi Jinping has done, but it is now being done in Vietnam. And that is a telling indication, frankly, of where we are in the region, stretching from Myanmar to Vietnam. And the really sad thing is that no one is paying attention.
This is where I wanted to go next, is that between us we work pretty much opposite ends of the spectrum from a media perspective. How do you see the extraordinary changes that have taken place in the media game over the last 20 years? How has that impacted on your ability to get the message out, to communicate with people?
Well, I mean, let's look at Cambodia. If we go back to 2016, yep. You had two major English language dailies.
Which were independent.
Independent, the Cambodia Daily and the Phnom Penh Post. You had dueling newsrooms. Mm-hmm. You had young journalists coming into the region, as well as young Khmer journalists coming up, who were all being educated, yep. Who spoke English. A number of those journalists, in fact, there was the sister publication of the Phnom Penh Post was the Myanmar Times. Right. So there was for a period of time, a number of people working in Cambodia, and then they switched over to Myanmar.
Sure, Myanmar.
Myanmar became democratic in 2015.
Right.
So there was, a different era dawning in Myanmar as well, and so you had a media environment where it seemed to be a lot of hope and optimism. There were some incredible stories being done, muckraking, digging into corruption, exposing various different malfeasance, what have you.
Excuse me.
But the long and short of it was that media was very vibrant and was independent.
And it was covering everyday events.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just focused on human rights or opposition politicians or the government. It was
everything.
And from that, the fabric is...
Well, it's been completely torn. Right. Vietnam has no independent media. Laos certainly has no independent media. And I would say Cambodia has almost no independent media.
Pretty close to...
Thailand, you have a demise of some of the major dailies.
It does seem to have improved, however, over the last couple of years.
Well, I mean, no, but you used to have two major English dailies here. Right. And now there's only one that's publishing actually a print copy. Mm-hmm. The other one's online. Myanmar, of course, I mean, all the Myanmar media has now again fled to Thailand after the military coup in February 2021. So, we were dealing with exiled media.
Right.
If you go to Chiang Mai, you'll find, it's a sort of deja vu situation where you almost are back to the 1990s or the early 2000s, where you had all the Myanmar media basically ensconced up in Chiang Mai and along the border, reporting on Myanmar from outside the country. That is now happening again, although the difference is that there is still quite a number of brave journalists who are standing and remaining
Yep.
in Myanmar to get the news out. But those journalists are constantly under threat. And
And
military finds someone who's a journalist, even if they're like taking photos on the street or trying to do an interview, they're in for it.
No, I was just going to add that a lot of them are working undercover, i.e. a communications specialist working with a...
not even that. They're not even saying communications specialist. Right. They're saying I'm just unemployed youth. And now what has happened, of course, in Myanmar, if you have the imposition of a mandatory conscription that is going to sweep up all men between 18 and 35 and all women between 18 and 27 for mandatory military service. And whoever's left in the cities is heading for the exits.
Right. Perceptions in the West, there was this odd case in Australia where an ABC journalist, Antoinette Lattouf, was fired from her job because she reposted a Human Rights Watch statement on Israel. I thought that was quite odd. Human Rights Watch has you guys have a solid reputation around the planet for the work you do, and I thought that was just a little bit offbeat. And your organisation wrote an open letter to Ida Buttrose, the publisher.
Right.
What came out of all that? I just thought that was a little bit.
Well, the response we got to the letter was not satisfactory in any way, shape, or form. It's interesting. On one hand, they're not impugning our work. They're not saying that, what we published about Palestine and Gaza in this instance was in any way wrong.
No, they never said that at all.
They didn't go there. They're claiming that, somehow she did something that was outside her remit as a journalist, which is, they're trying to say that she posted something on social media. It's absurd. And hopefully, eventually, the ABC will lose this case, and it will be a lesson to them to not censor journalists. I mean, the bigger issue is what's behind it.
Well, this is where I wanted to go, and not just with Australia, but in terms of the perceptions of the West through the media and what is happening in this part of the world. It's competing with, that sounds a bit silly, but the idea that countries in Southeast Asia are competing with Gaza and Ukraine in terms of the attention of politicians in places that matter.
Well, I think that's certainly the case. I mean, Cambodia has never mattered so little to people in the West. I mean, people forget, now 30 years ago.
That's another generation.
That this was. Cambodia and UNTAC was in the headlines. Gareth Evans, the foreign minister of Australia, leading the way. Where's Australian leadership now in Cambodia? It doesn't exist. I think that if we really look at Cambodia then and Cambodia now, it's been a killing in the dark, and the killing has been democracy and human rights. Those were the things that were promised to the Cambodian people as part of the UN engagement in that country, and it's all gone. But the larger issue is that the attention of the world has essentially been drawn away from this region, particularly the Mekong. Everybody always says that, ASEAN matters so much. It's the biggest population polls. This is where the economies are growing. Everybody says they want to do business in Asia. But when you talk about political attention, when you talk about development aid, when you talk about, willingness to speak up on core issues of human rights and democracy,
sure.
Not only is Australia missing, but also the United States is increasingly missing. The European Union and its member states are increasingly missing. We're just not getting the level of attention. And I had a very, very telling conversation with a group of diplomats from Europe when I was in Phnom Penh last time. And they all ultimately agreed with my argument that Hun Manet is old wine in a new bottle, that he's not one iota different on democracy and human rights from his father, Hun Sen. But they were always talking about, it's a much younger cabinet, and they speak better English, and somehow, they're more accessible. And I was like, what is this? Is this like teachers grading students for having the appropriate tone in class? The bottom line is that people are being driven out of Cambodia. Opposition people are having their livelihoods. Land is being seized. Malfeasance and corruption is an all-time high in Cambodia.
And so are the number of political prisoners.
Yeah, and they want to talk about the fact that it's now easier to get a meeting with a minister.
What surprised me is that this image that they're putting forward, we're open for business, we're trading, but when the businessmen get on the ground in countries like Cambodia and in Vietnam and elsewhere around the region, they're now experiencing the exact same problems that journalists, NGO workers, opposition politicians, lawyers and academics began to experience around 8 years ago.
Yeah. Well, you have ongoing malfeasance. I mean, Cambodia, the bribes that are required to bring, basically raw materials into the country and things like that, it's off the charts. I mean, I remember there were some surveys of the garment manufacturers before COVID, and they were all complaining about all the sort of off-book costs that were involved in doing business in Cambodia. Because these guys were seen as, when they bring in money and they bring in investment, everybody gloms onto it. Everybody wants a piece. The party's taking some, the senior people are taking some, the police are taking some. The cost of doing business is inflated.
Sure.
By those kind of off-budget corruption costs. And when we talk about good governance, it's not just about government corruption, but it's also the cost of doing business. It's about being able to speak out. It's about knowing that, for instance, you could take a complaint to a government department and try to get some sort of outcome. None of those things are possible. And they're becoming even less possible under many of these governments because they're becoming much more dictatorial and people are afraid to even post things on Facebook, much less file a complaint.
Where would you like to see things go over the next 10 years versus where do you think life in Southeast Asia will go?
Well, if we look at Thailand, I want to see democracy solidified here. I want to see a recognition that the military can't have any more coups. The military has to be depoliticized, and it has to be taken out of the political context and dynamics. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening. So, democracy will continue to be under threat despite the fact that everybody talks about how wonderful democracy is, but, we constantly have lurking in the background the military and the possibility of another takeover. If you look at places like Cambodia and Laos, it's hard to see any sort of future that's going to be vibrant and good for the people.
I think it's a situation made worse by the state of the economies, and the Chinese are not returning with bag loads of money like they'd once hoped.
Well, I think they, in some ways, China's investment is all about what it does for China, not about what it does for the country at hand. But more importantly, I think what we're going to face is a real environmental disaster connected to the Mekong. That the Mekong is going to ultimately fail. That the freshwater fisheries that provide protein to so many people, not only in Cambodia but also in Vietnam and others, is going to fail. At what point, in how many years from now, does the river not reverse back into the Great Lake, into the Tonle Sap? When that happens, the richness of those fisheries, which is amongst the richest fisheries in the world after the Amazon, will fail.
And that will be another human rights issue.
So you're going to talk about issues of food security in the center of Cambodia. And Thailand can take more migrant workers, but how many more can they take? And the abuses and violence and things that are done against migrant workers in Thailand are a very significant problem. Right now we have, for instance, the Thai government is talking about backsliding on the major anti-trafficking reforms that were created in 2015 to deal with the Thai fishing industry. There are 8 laws that were just passed in the first reading in the parliament to walk that all back. So we're sliding back towards the bad old days, right at a time when we're going to see more pressures from Myanmar, from Laos, and from Cambodia to send migrants into Thailand.
Phil Robinson, thanks very much. It's been a delightful chat.
Great to see you.
Cheers.